Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Jim Speer, founder of Mobility Support Solutions, which is the first provider of roadside assistance covering both the United States and Canada that focuses specifically on the needs of drivers with mobility disabilities, not just the disabled vehicle. Mobility Support Solutions provides peace of mind through full-service roadside assistance, including accessible transportation pickup for people with mobility disabilities, their families, vehicles, and their equipment. Jim is a Navy veteran with over 40 years of experience in the automotive, trucking, and insurance industry. He's been in sales all his life and lives with multiple disabilities himself. He's a proud father to 4 children and has been married to his wife for 48 years. All right. Well, hi, Jim. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We're so pleased to have you.
Thanks, Emily. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So before we get into a little bit about your company and the work that you do, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of in your own words?
I'm a Navy brat. My dad was in the service for 37 years. When somebody asked me how long I was in, I had my own tour duty that was 6 years. But adding my 6 to the 18 while I was at home, I got 24, if you will. My experience at home was harder than my boot camp experience. Boot camp was a breeze for me, just because I was in a Navy family. My dad ran it like a ship, and so it was that kind of experience that I had. But when I went into the service at 16 in the reserves, I served from 63 until 69, and then moved out here to Seattle, where I'm located now. From the East Coast, I was serving mostly in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean. Enjoyed my time as far as the Navy is concerned, but I didn't want to be a full-time swabby, if you will. The reason why is just I saw all kinds of things it did to my father, and I didn't want it to happen to me. But I had another agenda, and my agenda was I knew that I wanted to be in sales. And from the time I was 11, I had a number of paper routes, and my very first one was the kind of thing where I had 67 when I started, and 360 when I left, and gave it when my dad got transferred, and I gave it to somebody else. And kind of a unique little tidbit of information on my paper route, I had 5 of the first 7 astronauts on my paper route. That was in Langley, Virginia. My dad was on the Enterprise, building the Enterprise back in the early 60s. And so that was kind of a unique piece, that I got to know them, and because they were on my route. I didn't get to see them much. They were very busy. NAS was at Langley Air Force Base back in those days on the peninsula. But when I moved out of the Navy, I moved out here, and right away got employed. The next day I got employed actually after landing here in a sales job, and I just have been in sales ever since, for over 50 years. That's where I am now. I'm married. I have 4 children. My wife and I are 48 years now married, and I just enjoyed being a dad and a father, and I did it differently than my dad. That was a unique experience for me, because I just didn't want to follow his model. All that aside, it was just a great time. I wish I had 3 more kids, to tell you the truth. That's how much fun it was. And so then moving up until where we are today, I've had a number of companies that I've started, that agencies I've started over the years. I've always been an independent contracted type of person, self-employed type of a person, because I had a hard time with authority. Even though I was in the service, I had a hard time with authority. But I was able to work through that and finally overcome it, actually, when I was about 28. But a great part of that happened because of my disability, to tell you the truth. When I was in the Navy, I was on the deck. I was in the deck division. I was a boatswain's mate, and I ran a 55-foot utility boat, captain's gig, which was really great duty. But when we were out to sea, I did my chipping and painting with my hammer and brush. But I also, when we had exercises where we shot guns off the ship, I was what they call a hot shell catcher, and I wore a asbestos apron and gloves and caught these hot shells. Well, we didn't have ear protection. We didn't have OSHA back in those days, and so we didn't have ear protection, and that created issues with my hearing. Then later on, I got taken care of. Still deal with it today. I have to wear hearing aids. I don't like them, but I have to wear them, and it helps me a great deal. But out of it came a tinnitus also, which is just screaming in my ears, even as we're talking. It's always a buzz, like just a harsh buzz sound, like a radio or something. That's always going on in my head. But that came out of my experience as far as the Navy is concerned. It really is where my disability, if you will, was coming from. I also, just a little factoid, was that in '72 I was on a fishing trip and riding in the back of the pickup, and I got tossed out, and I fell out of the truck and crushed my knee, and I had 5 operations in the knee. So that set me in another place of disability and disability understanding, because I've had issues with it ever since, and they're getting, as I get older, they're getting harder to deal with. So that brings us up to today in a fashion, because I know that some of the things I'd like to talk about, and I think if you've asked me to, is, about the company and how we started that, and what that's all about, but that we're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. We will definitely get to that. But first, I'd like to understand. So you mentioned you have hearing loss and a knee injury, but I also know that you are dyslexic. Is that right?
I am, yeah.
I'm curious, how you've got several disabilities going. How do those affect you? What have been some of the access challenges that you've experienced yourself?
Yeah, when it comes to the hearing side, it created a lot of problems between the time I got out of the service and really 28 when I went to the VA to get hearing aids, and started that process. But I lost a number of jobs because I just wasn't hearing what was going on, and it was kind of sad in some respects, the way that it happened, but it happened, and what I did was it just moved on, and so I had, and it's not, I'm not bragging about this, but I had 31 jobs between the time I was 19 and 28. Not a great thing to talk about, but a lot of it came from my disability and hearing issues, because I could be faced in a different direction from somebody, and I never heard what they said. And especially if it was ambient noise around, and the ambient noise would just really dumb down everything and filtered down everything, so that I could not hear very well. But so that part of it hit me, and as far as the dyslexia is concerned, and it's in 2 areas: reading and numbers. And I have, even to this day, hard time computing and putting those together. But I learned how to, in my time, I was taught how to sight read instead of read phonetically, which is not a really good thing. I wish I would have learned how to read phonetically. It's something that would have helped me a great deal. But it because of that dyslexia, I was able, if I see the first letter and the second letter of a word, I know what it is. It's just one of those things. I can read one of those. You've seen those tests where they have this all mumble jumble with the first word and the first letter and the last letter, or I can read through a whole book like that without any issues. It's just weird, it's how this dyslexia is. But you can't use that in your everyday life. It's just in those circumstances, it's a game that I can win, but as a rule, it created some problems. And as far as math is concerned, I've had to really push off. I'm grateful for my CFO, my wife, everybody else that took those numbers and ran the checkbooks and did the things, because I never was able to balance those things. It never made sense to me. I couldn't get the things to work. And the hardest part about that was, and I'm not trying to compare myself to my dad, but my dad was a nuclear physicist. And so he used the slide rule and tried to teach me how to use the slide rule. Yeah, it didn't work. That was the first generation of computers back in those days. It never made sense to me.
That's interesting. Well, I have a physicist dad as well, so I can relate. So tell me more about, you have this dyslexia. It sounds like you've had that all your life. Did that affect your ability to get into the Navy? Was there any sort of test that you had to pass, or did they, was there a reading test, anything like that?
Well, no, there wasn't anything like that. Not back in my day. In the 60s, they were looking for every warm body that they could, to get in the service. And I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be a Marine or in the Army, because Vietnam was just starting up and I could see it coming. And my dad was telling me about it. And I thought, well, I'd rather be in the Navy on the high seas someplace. And so I went into the Navy. And being a bosun's mate, you didn't have to have a whole lot of skills other than how to handle, and just do the work that you were told to do. And I enjoyed that. It was okay. It was busy work. I would have been really I'd really had a hard time if I ever had just to sit around, most of the time doing nothing. But so I was glad I was busy. So as long as I stayed busy, and I learned, I can learn really quickly when it comes to watching and seeing somebody do it and then follow them. That was never the issue. I could probably wind up doing it as good or better than they did sometimes because of just compensating the lack of abilities that I had.
So tell us more about your company, the company that you're currently involved with, Mobility Solutions. I'd love to know more about it, more about the inspiration for starting it. So let's start there.
Yeah, it started in 2013 when at a time when I thought I was, retiring. To tell you the truth, I was 68 at the time, and I thought, okay, what am I? It didn't make sense to retire because I had too much that I wanted to do and too many things that I wanted to do. But in a visit that I made for my hearing at the VA hospital here in Seattle, I was sitting next to a guy and we just got to talking about what we do like everybody does. What do you do for a living? And we got in that conversation and I told him I was in the emergency roadside business with insurance companies. And he said, oh, I had the opportunity to use that product a few weeks ago. And I said, oh, how'd it work for you? He said, well, we're great on my van, but they left me on the side of the road in my chair. And
Oh my gosh.
You're kidding. What do you mean? He says, well, they picked my van up on a flatbed truck. I'm not going to ride in the flatbed truck and they're not going to let me anyway. And their insurance probably wouldn't let me. But he says, I can't get up in the cab of the truck. My chair is 400 pounds. And plus me, and he said, so I had to wheel myself about a half mile off the freeway up to a strip mall and wait for my wife for a couple of hours. And I went, wow. And it just I just sat it and thought about it. He went off to his appointment. And as soon as he left, there was a guy sitting in front of us that was a Marine. And I knew he was a Marine because he had a Marine t-shirt on. And he says, hey, I overheard you guys' conversation. I said, I got to tell you, that's my greatest fear. Well, right away, I thought, wait a minute. A Marine talking about fear? That doesn't even compute.
Right.
I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I think I could pretty much fend for myself in any kind of circumstance like that. But what do I do with my wife and 3 small children? And I went, wow. So I went back to my office and I Googled it and found that there was nothing except for a little small company in San Diego that served just a niche area having to do with commercial vehicles, but not customers, not consumers. And so I called my fulfillment company and said, hey, I'd like to put something together for that. And they said, let's do it. And so it took about 6 months to put it together. We got it all together. And because of my experience and my background, and most of my sales experience has been in the auto industry with the aftermarket items, that they offer. I knew the auto industry. So I thought I'm going to go after the wheelchair accessible van industry, which is kind of a small industry in some respects because it's wheelchair vans, conversion vans. That's really what it is. But I went after them, and one of the very first accounts that we got was the largest group in the country. And they started putting on everything that went out the door, new and used vehicles, and they just put it on everything that went out the door. So that got us all started, and that was in 2014, and we have moved through the process now to where we are now. It's 9 years later, and we're in the retail market, we're in associations, we're in organizations like PAV and all kinds. I mean, we just have a number of clients that are in the military sector, if you will, but realizing at the same time that it's not just the military that we're trying to serve. When I did my due diligence on this, the whole idea, one of the things that I found was that it was a report on the 2010 census that had a box on the census that said, are you mobility challenged? Which was a new word for me, by the way, a phrase for me. Are you mobility challenged in any way? And 54 million people checked that box.
Right.
Are you kidding me? I thought that's the most underserved market that I've ever found in my whole career. What's going on? So that's the premise. And so we realized we needed to open it up even bigger as far as the offering was concerned, not just to vets, but to the whole disabled community.
Right.
And really, we're moving even beyond that to the whole community, because I've asked my wife, Tyler's asked his wife, all of my team has asked their spouses, would you get up in a tow truck if it came up, and you had a roadside event? And my wife said, "Are you kidding me? I'd call you." I said, "Yeah, okay." I know Tyler's wife is the same way, and he's got 2 small kids. So we're not going to put him up. I'm not going to put my wife up in a truck. So we're moving into the traditional market, if you will, not just the wheelchair accessible van industry. And so,
Yeah.
and so it's working. It's really being accepted really well, and we're the 100% solution, where others are just the 50% solution.
Yeah. So tell me more about that. What is it that your company offers that other roadside companies don't?
Yeah, what we do is we call the tow truck. We have the tow, just like all the towing and coverages, like your insurance has, my insurance has, or if you're AAA or any of those others, that are out there independent. We do the same thing. We pick them up. Whether you have a flat tire, with battery problems or a wreck or whatever it might be, we'll come and take care of the tow. But what we do that's unique and nobody else does is we pull a vehicle up at the same time. We call an accessible vehicle NEMT, which is non-emergency medical transportation. And so that is pulled up to, especially for somebody with a chair or a scooter or something like that. That was the focus that we had when we started. But now it's we'll pull an Uber up, or we'll do all those kinds of things. And so what our job is to make sure that the tow and the vehicle get there at the same time to pick up the passengers, and them and the passengers, get them to safety, and the van can take off wherever it needs to go. So we just don't leave them on the side of the road. Bottom line.
And I believe I heard also that do you do some roadside wheelchair repairs as well?
Yeah, we do. Thanks for asking. That's right. When it comes to the conversion on the van, we also do that. When any of the mechanical pieces, electrical pieces on the van, the conversion, we have an hour's worth of troubleshooting time that we will pay a technician to fix it. Most of the time, by the way, it's really, really odd, but most of the time, by the way, it's just a reset button that they were told about when they bought their vehicle. But 2 years later, they can't remember what they heard, or there's no notes on it or anything else. So they call our number. Our technician tells them where to punch the button, and most of the time that takes care of it. If it doesn't, then we'll tow the vehicle to the repair facility to get that taken care of. The same thing is true of their chair or scooter. If they have a problem with their chair or scooter, breaks down, dead battery, whatever it might be, we'll come and take care of them, pick them up, and take them to get them taken care of with an hour's worth of technician time that we'll pay as far as troubleshooting it is concerned.
That's incredible. And I love that it sounds like you've, used your individual skills and your unique perspective to really fill a need for the disabled community that wasn't being met prior to your involvement. So I really commend you on that. What excites you about the future for accessibility for disabled folks?
Well, I think that there's really, maybe it's because I'm involved in it. I thought about that question, early on. I'm really close to the heat of this fire now, and to the community at large, the disabled community. And because of that, I see a lot more than I ever saw before. But I've always had a passion for the disabled, always. I grew up in a circumstance where I had a neighbor that my dad helped me understand how to take care of. He had epileptic seizures. He had a grand mal seizure every day. And I carried tongue depressors when I learned how to take care of him, when I was 14 years old, how to take care of him and make sure that he, didn't choke on his tongue. But that moved into other things having to do with the comfort or peace. I didn't have any issues walking up next to a disabled person and talking to them about their disability even. They like talking about it, actually, because nobody will communicate with them. Nobody will ask them the question. I know that there is an avoidance piece that's out there. Well, that's never been my modus operandi. I've always tried to befriend them or be friendly, and that kind of thing. And so in those experiences that I had, it's kind of made me more sensitive to the things that are going on right now as far as ADA is concerned, and and how that's being implemented, because it fits in all kinds of areas. I mean, there's just tons of areas that still need changing. I mean, we see it all the time, whether it's hotels, and I can I go to a hotel and they tell me that it's an accessible room. That's a joke. I mean, they still got a tub in there that I got to reach my legs over and get in the tub. There's no handrails. What makes the thing accessible? I don't understand. Well, we have wider doors. Okay, big deal. Okay, that doesn't. I don't have a chair anyway. But those that have chairs, what does that mean to them?
Right.
What does it really mean? The same thing is true for me because I travel quite a bit, or did. They're trying to do the best that they can with the best job. In fact, just yesterday or day before yesterday, I saw an article. It was either in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes magazine that talked about how the airline industry is moving the front row next to the door to be an accessible seating area for people with wheelchairs, that they can just back their chair up into these locking devices, that are sitting in that row. It's about time, because
Right.
I believe that they are missing a market that I don't think they know how big it is. And it's strange to say that. I know that they're huge companies, billion-dollar companies, but if they took into account the idea that all of us as disabled people want to travel, we want to go. There's a lot of us that have wanderlust. I do. I like to go, and I've been all over the world. But a lot of people don't do that because it just, how am I going to get to the airport? How am I going to get out? How am I going to get on the plane? How am I going to get off the plane? Well, there's slowly but surely there's things that are working out. I can tell you one story. Just recently, my wife and I last September went to Hawaii for a couple of weeks, and the airline, I told them in advance what it was that I needed through a concierge that we had, a concierge type service that we have. And I told them what it was that we needed. And they had a where the food is, brought onto the plane, they backed a lift that handles disabled people in the chair. I didn't have to go down the ladder, which was the real skinny ladder that came out of the airplane, and just you walk down these really skinny steps. I wouldn't have made it. It just wouldn't have worked for me. And so I can make it up it, but I can't make it down it. And so they put me on this ramp, lowered me to the ground, came back, picked me up, when I needed to get on it, did the same thing coming back on the plane. I thought, okay, that worked. That makes sense. So they're slowly but surely, there's some things that are changing out there. But if they realize that those people want to travel, and their families and their whatever, their friends, and they would occupy more seats in the process, I think it would just be a boom for them, for more income, more, as far as airlines do it for money. Everybody does it for the money. I just see it coming. I see some things that are working in that direction, as far as that's concerned. I happen to live in an area that is very compliant to ADA. We have lots of, we have the ramps, the streets, the doors, we have the accessible bathrooms. But one of the things we do with our program, by the way, is we have an app that goes on the phone, and you can call that app anytime that you want and ask, where is an accessible restaurant within 10 minutes of where I am. And it'll tell them where it is. Where is an accessible bathroom? It'll tell them where it is. So we are doing those kinds of things also to help the disabled community.
That's awesome. Well, this has been so fun getting to know more about you and more about Mobility Solutions. Where can our listeners go to get in touch with you, get in touch with the company, find out more, and all of that?
Yeah, the best place is our website. Our website is www.mobilityroadsideassistance.com, and it'll show you the different plans that we have, and one of those has got to make it work for you. If you have any kind of disability at all, or even if you don't have a disability, we can provide the need for your safety of getting you off the road by doing what we do.
Right. Well, wonderful. Thanks so much, Jim, for being here, and thank you for your service to the country. We are actually speaking on Veterans Day, so that's really fortunate, and happy to be able to thank you for your service on Veterans Day.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucania is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DPAD0009-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.